Oh, this? It's just my "You Are Not a Machine" mug, of course. In my You Are Not a Machine hat. And my You Are Not a Machine hoodie, which just came in the mail. So, good evening. Thanks for being here again. A little bit of housekeeping. If you haven't been here before, there's a link in the show notes for the blog post, which I'll read. We're going over chapters 16, 17, and 18 of Paul Kingsnorth's Against the Machine on the Unmaking of Humanity. And hello, Stephen. Good to see you again. Greetings to you in Ottawa. We won't be doing anything next week. No anything, blogs, videos, or live streams. So we'll take Christmas week off and come back 2 weeks from tonight with the next live stream. And again, in the show notes, there should be the schedule. Again, please join the mailing lists so you can keep up to date with the live stream dates. Those are the most up to date. Again, the link to the newsletter is in the show notes. What else? Oh, there's also a link to the merch store, which will be open for a few more days. And I'm going to be closing it here soon. So the merch looks great. I think it's good quality. And if you want to support some of this work and start interesting conversations over Christmas, there's still, I think, maybe a couple more days. So you can order in time for Christmas. If you're Orthodox and on the old calendar, then you have another couple weeks. I think that's it as far as housekeeping goes. I'm going to read the blog post and we'll go from there. In chapter 16, Kingsnorth discusses the rise of transgenderism and its connection to transhumanism. Kingsnorth's focus is on a construct offered by American sociologist Philip Rieff in his book, The Triumph of the Therapeutic, where Rieff discusses 4 general types of human that have existed in history: political man, idealized by Plato and Aristotle; religious man, idealized during the Middle Ages; economic man, idealized in capitalism; and psychological man, which is where we largely find ourselves today. Here's a quote from the book. Crucially, psychological man is qualitatively different to his ancestors. Unlike them, he finds meaning and identity not so much in outward directed activity as in what Rieff calls the, quote, inward quest for personal psychological happiness, end quote. His reality is unmoored, shared, and crucially internal. This has implications for the culture which we see unfurling around us today. It's from page 172. When considering human nature, there are at least 2 problematic approaches. On the one hand, it can be a temptation to assume that humans have always experienced life in essentially the same way as we do. On the other hand, there is an opposite temptation to think that our experiences as modern people are untethered from any kind of shared experience with our ancestors, by virtue of the fact that we are human. The first temptation blinds us to the reality that the way in which we live our lives is very different from that of our ancestors. If humans in the 21st century feel unmoored and disoriented, it's likely because the world in which we find ourselves has become so unmoored and detached from reality. The second temptation blinds us from the source of this detachment, the reality that there really is a fixed human nature, and that some things contribute to human flourishing and that some things do not. The problem with psychological man is that he is largely uninterested in history, because all that matters at the end of the day is how he feels about himself. The other great problem is that because a human's inner world is constantly in a state of flux, determined by diet, hormones, aging, all sorts of factors, internal and external, there is no completely stable aspect of one's life. According to Rieff, as quoted by Kingsnorth, here's a quote from Rieff from the book. All of the, that is the first 3 types of man, found their purpose and well-being by being committed to something outside themselves. In the world of psychological man, however, the commitment is first and foremost to the self and is inwardly directed. Thus, the order is reversed. Outward institutions become, in effect, the servants of the individual and her sense of inner well-being. And that is from page 172. Previously, one's inner world would be regulated somewhat by the stability of the outer world. One's commitments to the community, political man, one's commitments to God, religious man, and one's commitments to work, economic man. By focusing his attention inward, psychological man does not have any of these sources of external stability. These previous ages of man were not, however, equal. Kingsnorth notes that, quote, Reef, like Marx before him, understood that the revolutionary nature of capitalism meant that economic man could only ever be a temporary phenomenon. In the end, he would undermine the foundations of his own prosperity. End quote, also from page 172. Political man, similarly, is only as stable as the political world in which he lives. It is only religious man who has a truly stable source for meaning in life. Ultimately, this source is God. This faith is also necessary for the stability of human nature. In order to recognize and to preserve the reality and inviolability of a consistent human nature throughout human history, religious faith is necessary. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, man's purpose is grounded in his creation in the image and likeness of God, as recounted in Genesis 1, 26 and 27. Outside of religious faith, there is no foundation for a consistent human nature. Charles Darwin's theory of evolution and the consequent popular but completely unscientific myth of progress that it inspired has, of course, had a profound effect in undermining modern man's belief in a stable human nature. Most recently, as Kingsnorth points out, this myth has been massively funded by tech billionaires committed to this myth, and likely also because of the great wealth accumulation that such a commitment has enabled. So those are my thoughts on chapter 16. And if you don't have any questions or comments, I will just continue on to chapter 17. In chapter 17, Kingsnorth considers the importance of home and what its destruction in the modern world has meant. And here's a quote from the book. What killed the home? 3 things, said Wendell Berry back then: cars, mass media, and public education. What could we add to this list now? The triumph of supermarkets, for one, and the whole panoply of long-distance shopping and global supply chains that go along with them. We could add careers, too, and perhaps this is the main culprit. And that's from page 186. One of the great challenges with discussing the topic of, quote, unquote, what is wrong with the world, is that so much that is wrong with the world is baked into our everyday reality, so as to make it largely invisible. Is it possible to imagine a world without cars, mass media, public education, supermarkets, the global supply chain, and careers? And there are, of course, many other things that have contributed to the destruction of the home. Berry and Kingsnorth provide us with a helpful, if introductory, list. That said, while it's helpful to understand the depth and breadth of our predicament, it's more helpful to consider practical ways that we can find our way back home. I have discussed these things before and will discuss them again. One of the most obvious ones is to do whatever you can to develop community and to put down roots. If this is possible where you are, wonderful. If it requires you moving somewhere, whether because of cost, relationships, whatever, then moving somewhere may be the path forward. Regardless of what it looks like, building community requires commitment, action, and putting down roots. The more rooted we are and the stronger our community, the more we will be able to withstand whatever the machine has in store for us next, the AI apocalypse or whatever it might be. As with planting a tree, commitment and putting down roots is the only way to grow something new. And as an aside, I think there's a great deal of psychological health and peace that comes with the knowledge that you have people that care about you nearby. That should be obvious. But as obvious as it may seem, we don't live our lives that way. And there's some things that have a greater value and like an outsized kind of effect on one's life. And this is one of those things that um, kind of goes overlooked, maybe underappreciated, because it's not always convenient. But if one wants to have a sense of security, then it's really important that you actually have a community, and it's not like a virtual community, and it's not just a bedroom or a like a commuter community, a commuter church, for example, that you just kind of go to once or twice a week. Communities of all types are great, online and otherwise, but online and commuter communities cannot take the place of actual real community where you live in proximity to people, so that if you have a physical problem, you have people that care about you that are nearby. And the problem, obviously, in the modern world is that we don't put any kind of priority or value on that, and it's greatly to our detriment, for sure. Here's another quote from the book. The war against home manifests on the human scale, which means we can reverse it, at least to some degree, under our own steam. In these times, any blow struck for the survival or the revival of the home and the family is an act of resistance and of rebuilding. Homemaking, it turns out, is not something to flee from in pursuit of freedom, as I wanted to do when I was younger. It is a skill, or a whole set of them. A set I have come to value maybe above everything else I do. That's from pages 190 and 191. Another reason for optimism is that the skills that go into homemaking are not overly complicated or expensive. Humans have nurtured homes for millennia. It's only in the past 50 years or so that we've abandoned this hugely meaningful and community building activity. Homemaking is also ultimately one of the most fulfilling endeavors that humans can be involved in. It does require community, however, as well as a dedication of focus away from the marketplace, away from the digital and the transient. And that is it for chapter 17. And I've got some messages. Oh, great. Good to see you all. Hi, Kate. Even quote unquote religious man has to deal in a form of currency, hence capitalism. People won't go back to barter. They'll sign up to a UB. I'm not sure what a UB is. Yes, well, certainly. It's more, I think all these things are kind of a question of degree. And we are at the place in the scientific revolution, the technological revolution, where the levers are so great and so powerful that they are the effects are greatly, outweigh the inputs. The most obvious example, as I've used before, is the nuclear bomb. It's obviously a comparatively small device, but with incredibly destructive power. So that's and AI is a technology like that, certainly. So obviously there's always been, even, when people were bartering, there was always, since almost the dawn of man, at some point, very early on, humans developed money and ways to transact in a market. So certainly it's not a question of not having a market at all. It's more a question of everything being subservient to the market. Good evening, Arlene. And hi, Audrey. This is Audrey. The modern lack of belief in human is very evident among the atheists and agnostics I'm friends with. Human nature, I guess. It seems to stem from their evolutionary worldview, but also from deconstructionist philosophy. Yeah. Deconstruction philosophy such as can be found in Sartre and Foucault. Yes, yes, that's interesting. That's a helpful bit of information. I want to use the term data point, but I'm trying not to use machine language. Some of it is really convenient. It is a interesting data point. I would love to have conversations with atheists, with people that do not believe in human nature. Be interested to see kind of where that conversation goes. At a certain point, obviously, they must believe in nature. And I mean, if you look at, why, I guess the question I would ask is, why are humans the outlier, the exception to the rule? If you look at, how lions act, or how bees act, they act in a certain way. They don't kind of just make things up as they go along. There's a bee nature, there's a lion nature, and we expect that. When we see a bear, we don't expect that the bear is going to act like a lamb. We also don't expect that a lamb is going to attack us, if it's in its right mind. That's not in the lamb nature necessarily, unless it's, protecting its young or something. So nature has its own nature. Animals have their own nature, and trees, do one thing. They don't kind of randomly do a variety of things, and they can be shifted in a little bit, but there is a basic, so there are, I think people can kind of, in theory, suggest that there is no human nature, but the reality, if they're honest, gravity exists whether or not one wants to believe that it exists, and it always will exist in the world as we know it. Anyway, that's interesting. Thank you for I think that's a big question, and certainly an important kind of foundational position that one has to have. Otherwise, none of this stuff is a problem. Like the process that we're going through, and children becoming addicted to their smartphones, I guess someone who doesn't believe in a fixed human nature would just say, well, that's just part of the process of the evolutionary process, and humans will adapt to it and it'll be fine. And obviously the science suggests otherwise. For a variety of reasons, it's very unhealthy, it's very destructive. And then on a much bigger scale, technology generally is not leading to pronatal societies. On the contrary, most countries in the world have a demographic problem, and some are, incredibly bad off. South Korea, Japan, in particular, Italy. Some countries are, in 50 years are going to almost not exist. So it's hard to see how that can be kind of squared with some kind of evolutionary program. Anyway, don't want to go off into too many rabbit trails, but if you weren't here when I started, I'm just showing off the merch that I got, my You're Not a Machine mug, hat, and hoodie. So so glad to see so many people here this evening. I'm going to read through my last section of my blog post. Again, there's a link to the blog post in the show notes under the video if you want to follow along. In chapter 18, Kingsnorth considers the idea of the nation of nationalism And he argues that it has largely been replaced by the grid. And here's a quote. The grid is a physical manifestation of the values of the machine on the landscape itself. And it is, I think, replacing the nation just as it is replacing culture and antiquated notions of tradition and the like. It is part of that ongoing process of colonization. The grid doesn't care about nations, roots, identities, patriotism, or tradition. It doesn't care about anything. That's from page 200. So a little bit of a biographical note. I had a comparatively unusual childhood in that I had visited 3 continents by the age of 2 months. Because of my father's work, I moved to a new country every few years during my childhood. While I did not have a quote unquote normal childhood vis-a-vis my relationship with a particular place and country, it may be the case that my experience of longing for roots began earlier than most. Moving every few years, I remember desperately wanting a country to call my own, a place for my mind and my body to rest among my people. Throughout ancient literature, from the Old Testament to Homer, and since then, from Dante to Shakespeare to Tolstoy, there is this desire, this nostos, for a return to home, family, to one's homeland. For people of faith, this desire is ultimately fulfilled in the afterlife. As St. Augustine wrote in his Confessions, quote, "Our hearts are restless until they rest in you," end quote. As with many things in the spiritual life, however, this transcendent and deeply human desire is most naturally manifest in the world as love for those things that are closest to us, family, local community, and perhaps nation too. In the Screwtape Letters, C.S. Lewis famously noted the temptation, largely a modern temptation, to focus one's attention, concern, and love on abstractions, fantasy, rather than on the reality of the world immediately around us. In one of his letters, Uncle Screwtape advises, and again, if you haven't read the Screwtape Letters, Uncle Screwtape is an older demon who is counseling a younger demon, supposedly his nephew. But it's just a conceit. They obviously don't have those kind of relationships. But so everything's kind of inverted. Here's the quote from the Screwtape Letters from Uncle Screwtape, who writes, "There is no good at all in inflaming his hatred of Germans." So that's the Englishman who the demon is trying to tempt away from God. This is around the time of World War II. So there's no good at all in inflaming his hatred of Germans if at the same time a pernicious habit of charity, love, is growing up between him and his mother, his employer, and the man he meets in the train. Think of your man as a series of concentric circles, his will being the innermost, his intellect coming next, and finally his fantasy. You can hardly hope at once to exclude from all the circles everything that smells of the enemy. Again, everything's inverse. So in this instance, the enemy is God, the enemy of the demon. But you must keep on shoving all the virtues outward till they are finally located in the circle of fantasy. And that's from letter 6. So this is what the modern world has done so well since, as Neil Postman noted, probably the advent of the telegraph. It was the first time through an electric current that a message could move faster, much, much faster than a human. So knowledge could be passed around at the speed of electricity. And it was the first time that knowledge kind of became this really great commodity, and especially timely knowledge. And that's where we get our sense of the news. But all of this sense of knowing what's going on in different places, parts of the world, is obviously largely a phenomenon of the last 200 years. And it destroys local communities, and then it also steals the attention and concern of the local people by focusing it on distant people and these distant concerns. So just as ultimately you can only truly act locally, all real love is local. Certainly it's good to have compassion and concern for all people everywhere, but at the end of the day, most of us cannot do anything substantial for those outside of our immediate community. And as Lewis points out, by focusing our attention and concern on abstractions, we are less able or likely to love and care for those whom we can actually properly love and care for. There is no shame in loving one's family, one's community, and one's country. That said, as Kingsnorth rightly points out, quote, at the same time, a simple reactionary nationalism will achieve nothing but a deepening of divisions. Anyone who wants to protect, rejuvenate, or rebuild their nations must first have an idea of what at root that nation is, and they must take into account all of the people living in it. And that's from page 205. Finally, at the end of the chapter, Kingsnorth suggests the path forward. Here's another quote. To me, the dissolution of the modern nation state into smaller, more anarchic, less centralized units would be welcome. Perhaps then we could rediscover the roots of our old nations and begin to rebuild them again. Perhaps, too, new nations will form, built around a spiritual core and a love of place, which will give to their people the kind of meaning which the nation states of the machine era have so successfully imitated, whilst at the same time destroying. Perhaps we will live in real nations again. Perhaps we will build them. Nobody else can. That's from page 205. It's difficult to imagine a world in which Kingsnorth's vision might be realized, but it's important nonetheless to have a North Star by which to orient oneself. The truth is that we don't know what the future holds. In whatever is coming, there is good reason to believe that we are entering previously uncharted territory, the fallout of which is impossible to know. And that is it for my blog post this week and my thoughts on chapter 16, 17, and 18. I don't know if there are any other thoughts or questions regarding the reading. As I mentioned at the beginning, we will not be doing anything next week. We'll be returning 2 weeks from tonight. So the next live stream and the next video will be 2 weeks from today. And yeah, so hope you enjoy your time off. I know that I will. Wish you all a blessed Christmas and holiday season. And hope if you haven't been able to keep up with the reading that you'll be able to catch up. And yeah, I guess that's it for tonight. Hope this finds you all well. Thanks for being here. Again, check out the merch if you're so inspired. And say good night.